Hello, this is Nick Rijmakers from Adobe, here to talk to you about the HTTP cache module from ACS AEM Commons, and in particular about the topic invalidation of content. So in this regard, by default, the module does not invalidate your content. You will need to instrument, I would say, the module on how to actually invalidate it. And there are basically two ways to do this. One is the simple way, which will be compatible with most use cases. And it's just for the most part just with OSGI configs. And the other one is to, well, go a bit deeper and to actually write your own logic. And this is useful when the standard out-of-the-box solution doesn't suffice. So let's get started. I'll start with the standard scenario. So in the previous videos, I've shown you a very simple component that just loads in a resource, basically with a rendition HTML, and then there's a thread sleep of 5 seconds just to simulate a component that is very expensive to render, and then it gets cached in the HTTP cache. And as you can see, it's still there. Here's the key, and there it is being cached. So now the question is, what if the underlying resource here changes? By default, it will actually get stale, so it won't change here. But I already applied some code, and I will show that to you in a little bit. But I also just added just a very simple, oops, I'm on the wrong, let's see, here we go. Wrong view. I just added a very simple property here, text property, to demonstrate the invalidation. So here I'll change it. And if correct, this will now get cleared out. Okay, so it's cleared out. So how did I achieve this? Well, I'll show you. So step number one is I actually configured the JCR node change event handler that is provided out of the box with AEM Commons. And the only thing I did really is just put the sling OSGI config file in the config folder, and I specified the event filter. And in there I say, well, okay, path has to be under /content/layout -WCM with an asterisk. Of course, this can be also /content, whatever it is that you need for your project, /etc or /apps. Of course, you should try to narrow it down, of course, for performance reasons, but there you go. This does the trick for our use case. So that's step one, and what will happen in this case is that, let's see, if I go to the JCR store, let's see. Here it is. It's very simple. It's just a event handler that will react on the changes that under the path that you configured, and what it will do is create a sling job with the with the payload, with the path that is changed. Very simple. So that is one, and then it will land on the HTTP cache invalidation job consumer. And over here it will extract the path, and then it will actually call these two methods on the HTTP cache engine. First is path potential to invalidate, and then invalidate cache. So is path potential to invalidate basically will loop all the configs present and then execute the can invalidate method. And this will perform a regex of the path under this property. And this property stems from whatever you configured in your config file under this property here, invalidation oak path. So here you really will narrow down what can be invalidated, from, because this thing right here, of course, is really generic. It will take in almost everything or a lot of changes. And then you can narrow it down and save performance by properly configuring the statement here. Also, this here is a regex and the previous is a glob. So here you can really narrow it down better. And if this passes, so if this check passes, then you can actually better show it in the code, I believe. It will call the invalidate cache. And then it will actually loop all the configs, all the config services that are configured stemming from the factory, so all the instances. So basically for each config that you created, there will be one instance and it will loop them. And then what it will do is this gets a bit tricky. So this is a bit tricky, but I'm just going to explain it regardless, or attempt to explain it. What it will do, first of all, apply some general global rules. That's not something to pay too much attention to, but where the magic really happens basically is what it does. It builds a cache key from the string. So there are two constructors or two ways to build the cache key. One is from the sling request and one is from the resource path. The one with the resource path is actually purely just for invalidation most of the time, I would say. But this is necessary so that this method, where is it? The cache key is invalidated by can be called. And this is implemented by the abstract cache key. And the abstract cache key basically only checks if the resource paths are equal. So everything else can be different, but if the resource path is equal, then it will return true. And this is important because for basically any entry in the HTTP cache that has the underlying resource path of a resource that just changed, in 99.9% of the cases, that means you want to just clear out this entry just to be sure. Well, not only to be sure, in most cases it should actually be different because the underlying resource changed. So therefore, this only checks the resource path and nothing else. And in these cases, it's usually better to flush or clear a little bit too much than too little, because stale content is not what we want. So again, what it does, because it's quite complex, number one, it will build a cache key using the resource path. And every factory needs to implement this method. And the abstract cache key also supports this, the constructor from the resource path. And basically every key should actually, every key should be able to be constructed from the resource path. And then And again, this is really only used for these comparison purposes for cache invalidation. To build real actual keys that are stored for caching, that's done using this method. And then they will still both, they won't be equal. This one and this one won't be equal, but they will return true for the method can invalidate. Was it can invalidate? Let's check, because it's also a bit tricky for me. Is invalidated by. It will return true even though they're not equal, just to make sure that it's cleared. Unless, of course, you override this method yourself. By default, it's provided by the abstract cache key, but if you overload this, then you might do it different. I strongly would recommend not to overload this method unless you have a really good reason. I would try not to touch it. Actually, maybe we should even make this final, but maybe in some cases, then there's a good solid reason to overload this. So that's step one. And then going back, step two is that, to call this method invalidate on the HTTP cache store. And then this will basically, the first step again was to construct it, and the step two is to actually call the is invalidated by, with the key, and then if the resource path is matched or anything else, if you overload the method, then it will be invalidated. So that's how the invalidation works here. So where were I? Okay. So really, in most cases, you just need to only specify this right here, the HTTP cache config invalidation oak path. This is to narrow it down and to specify the change event handler here, broad. Could be even /content, that's even possible. And then that will take care of it in most cases. But of course, now there's another tricky part. What if, and now we go to the more sophisticated examples, what if you cache a resource in the HTTP cache, but that there is a component on that resource that utilizes resources under that resource, so children. And what if one of those children changes? Then this won't work, because this mechanism will result in the resource path being passed and being compared. But of course, if it's a child, that there won't be a match. There won't be a match even with, let's see, even with the default method. So that would be, let's see. So even with the default, by default provided is invalidated by, if it's a child resource, then this won't be a match because the resource path is different. However, we still want to invalidate it. So in this case, it gets a little bit more tricky, but I'll show you how to do it. So I have this project layout WCM pages to handle the header and footer. And as you can see, actually, it's already here. It's basically what it will do is construct a header and a footer, and the header is basically constructed based on the children in it. And I am caching here the JCR content resource, basically node with .content.html, and it's all working fine. But if anything under this path, header example, changes, then any child, then I want this entry to be cleared. So first of all, just to show that I actually have this working, I'm just gonna change one of the child pages as title. Edit that. And there you go, it's gone, it's invalidated. So how did I do this? Well, I'll show you that as well. Let's see. I believe that what I just done, actually, I created a component here, a resource change listener, well, not component, I mean service. And basically what I do here, I listen for any changes or adding or removing of resources under /content/layout-wcm. And what I do here is I have a regex. And what it does is it extracts the path. So I'm just going to do debugging here because that's easier. Let's see, first just get the content in. So let's see. All right, this should load it in. Okay, there it is. Then I'm going to attach my debugger. And I will again perform the same action. Okay. I hope it's not too slow. Okay, save. I hope the performance is catching up. Oh, or my code is out of sync. That wouldn't be good. Okay, I think my code is out of sync. That's not too great, but all right. Maybe this will work. Nah. Okay, well, my code is out of sync, but basically what I done here using the regex, I extracted the header path using a regex, and at least I can see that. So here it is. You can see I extracted it, and then I just create the sling job using the job manager and just put in the path using singleton map, whatever, can be something else. Just construct the map yourself. And then that's it, really. I could also actually just put a reference to the HTTP cache engine in here and just, call the invalidate here, but then I have to try catch it with, try catch and log that. Of course, that's no problem. I actually prefer the job manager because this, in some cases, in some offering systems, there's sometimes a race condition if you don't use this. So using this sling job manager, actually I never had any trouble whatsoever. So I would recommend to just use this instead of just calling the HTTP cache engine directly, just to make sure that that's all working properly. So yeah, here you go, it gets added, and that's it. So of course I cannot. So yeah, here it is, and then you stop debugging and it's cleared. So that's it. I hope I gave some insight to the process. It's a bit tricky, but again, just remember, for most cases, you can just, you're fine with just using the basic JCR change event handler and just configuring a invalidation oak path in your config file. And the other, if that's not good enough, if you need to react on anything that goes inside the node, then you can just use a regex statement and extract it, and just create a sling job. So just to make sure that whatever you extract actually matches the resource path. So in this case, that would be this, and not this. If I would pass in this, then nothing gets flushed. So, but other than this, you know, anything can be passed in. You could pass in also pass in this, or any string suffix here. You could pass it in as well, because the engine will unmangle basically the resource path and it will get invalidated. So that works pretty nice. All right, that's it. Hope this helped, and till next time. Bye for now.